The United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, has been accused of involvement in drug trafficking. Books and investigations on the subject that have received general notice include works by the historian Alfred McCoy, professor and diplomat Peter Dale Scott, journalists Gary Webb and Alexander Cockburn, and writer Larry Collins. These claims have led to investigations by the United States government, including hearings and reports by the United States House of Representatives, Senate, Department of Justice, and the CIA's Inspector General. According to Tim Weiner, the Central Intelligence Agency has been accused of forming alliances of convenience with drug traffickers around the world in the name of anti-communism since its creation in 1947. In the early 1970s, Alfred McCoy accused American officials of condoning and even cooperating with corrupt elements in Southeast Asia's illegal drug trade out of political and military considerations, and stated that the CIA was knowingly involved in the production of heroin in the Golden Triangle of Burma, Thailand, and Laos. The United States Department of State responded to the initial allegations stating that they were unable to find any evidence to substantiate them, much less proof. Subsequent investigations by the Inspector General of the CIA, United States House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and United States Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, that is the Church Committee, also found the charges to be unsubstantiated. In the 1980s, American journalists Anthony Avergan and Martha Honey claimed that the perpetrator of the La Penca bombing was linked to a drug-financed secret team of FDN Contras and CIA agents. The Christic Institute then filed a $24 million civil suit on behalf of Avergan and Honey, 30 charging defendants, including CIA officials, of illegally participating in assassinations, as well as arms and drug trafficking. A judge for the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida found that the plaintiffs made no showing of existence of genuine issues of material fact and ordered the Christic Institute to pay over $1 million in attorney's fees and court costs. The United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit affirmed the ruling, and the Supreme Court of the United States let the judgment stand by, refusing to hear an additional appeal. In August 1996, Gary Webb's three-part series of articles titled Dark Alliance was published by the San Jose Mercury News. Webb's series raised allegations that U.S. government officials, including Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and Department of Justice, DOJ, employees either ignored or protected drug dealers in Southern California who were associated with the Nicaraguan Contras. Investigation by the United States Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General, Central Intelligence Agency Office of Inspector General, and United States House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence rejected the main charges. Illegal labs producing heroin were first discovered near Marseille, France, in 1937. These labs were run by Corsican gang leader Paul Carbone. For years, the Corsican underworld had been involved in the manufacturing and trafficking of heroin, primarily to the United States. It was this heroin network that eventually became known as the French Connection. The Corsican gang was protected by the CIA and the STIS after World War II in exchange for working to prevent French communists from bringing the old port of Marseille under their control. During the Korean War, the first allegations of CIA drug trafficking surfaced after 1949, stemming from a deal whereby arms were supplied to Chiang Kai-shek's defeated generals in exchange for intelligence. Later in the same region, while the CIA was sponsoring a secret war in Laos from 1961 to 1975, it was openly accused of trafficking heroin in the Golden Triangle area. To fight its secret war against the Pathet Lao Communist Movement of Laos, the CIA used the Miao population. Because of the war, the Hmong depended upon opium poppy cultivation for hard currency. The plane of jars had been captured by Pathet Lao fighters in 1964, which resulted in the Royal Lao Air Force being unable to land its C-47 transport aircraft on the plane of jars for opium transport. The Royal Laotian Air Force had almost no light planes that could land on the dirt runways near the mountaintop poppy fields. Having no way to transport their opium, the Hmong were faced with economic ruin. Air America, a CIA-front organization, was the only airline available in northern Laos. Air America was an American passenger and cargo airline established in 1946 and covertly owned and operated by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, from 1950 to 1976. It supplied and supported covert operations in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, including providing support for drug smuggling in Laos. Alfred McCoy writes, according to several unproven sources, Air America began flying opium from mountain villages north and east of the Plain of Jars to CIA asset Hmong General Vang Pao's headquarters at Long Tieng. The CIA's front company, Air America, was alleged to have profited from transporting opium and heroin on behalf of Hmong leader Vang Pao, or of turning a blind eye to the Laotian military doing it. This allegation has been supported also by former Laos CIA paramilitary Anthony Poshepny, aka Tony Po, former Air America pilots, and other people involved in the war. It is portrayed in the movie Air America. Larry Collins alleged, during the Vietnam War, U.S. operations in Laos were largely a CIA responsibility. The CIA's surrogate there was a Laotian general, Vang Pao, who commanded Military Region 2 in northern Laos. He enlisted 30,000 Hmong tribesmen in the service of the CIA. These tribesmen continued to grow, as they had for generations, the opium poppy. Before long, there were unproven allegations that it was a mafia family from Florida, had established a heroin drug refinery lab in Region 2. The lab's production was soon being ferried out on the planes of the CIA's front airline, Air America. A pair of BNDD, the predecessor of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, agents tried to seize an Air America. Further documentation of CIA-connected Laotian opium trade was provided by Rolling Stone magazine in 1968, and by Alfred McCoy in 1972. McCoy stated that, in most cases, the CIA's role involved various forms of complicity, tolerance, or studied ignorance about the trade, not any direct culpability in the actual trafficking. The CIA did not handle heroin, but it did provide its drug lord allies with transport, arms, and political protection. In sum, the CIA's role in the Southeast Asian heroin trade involved indirect complicity rather than direct culpability. However, aviation historian William Leary writes that Air America was not involved in the drug trade, citing Joseph Westermeyer, a physician and public health worker resident in Laos from 1965 to 1975, that American-owned airlines never knowingly transported opium in or out of Laos, nor did their American pilots ever profit from its transport. Aviation historian Curtis Peebles also denies that Air America employees were involved in opium transportation. Following a 2009 FOIA request, the 2006 document Undercover Armies, CIA and Surrogate Warfare in Laos was released. Former CIA operations officer in Vietnam and CIA historian Thomas Ahern wrote, drawing from his own recollection, that local tribesmen being trained by the CIA were prohibited from carrying opium on U.S. chartered flights. Only large packages were inspected, so that small amounts of opium for local consumption might have been carried by individuals, but the prohibition of commercial traffic was unequivocal. During a PBS Frontline investigation, DEA field agent Hector Barrales said, "I believe that elements working for the CIA were involved in bringing drugs into the country. I know specifically that some of the CIA contract workers, meaning some of the pilots, in fact were bringing drugs into the U.S. and landing some of these drugs in government military air bases. And I know so because I was told by some of these pilots that in fact they had done that." Several journalists state that the CIA used Mena Intermountain Municipal Airport in Arkansas to smuggle weapons and ammunition to the Contras in Nicaragua, and drugs back into the United States. The CIA's self-investigation, overseen by the CIA's Inspector General, stated that the CIA had no involvement in or knowledge of any illegal activities that may have occurred in Mena. The report said that the agency had conducted a training exercise at the airport in partnership with another federal agency, and that companies located at the airport had performed routine aviation-related services on equipment owned by the CIA. In 1984, U.S. officials began receiving reports of Contra cocaine trafficking. 3 officials told journalists that they considered these reports reliable. Former Panamanian Deputy Health Minister Hugo Spadafora, who had fought with the Contra Army, outlined charges of cocaine trafficking to a prominent Panamanian official. Spadafora was later found murdered. The charges linked the Contra trafficking to Sebastián González Mendiola, who was charged with cocaine trafficking on November 26, 1984, in Costa Rica. In 1986, the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations began investigating drug trafficking from Central and South America and the Caribbean to the United States. The investigation was conducted by the Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, chaired by Senator John Kerry, so its final 1989 report was known as the Kerry Committee Report. The report concluded that it is clear that individuals who provided support for the Contras were involved in drug trafficking. The supply network of the Contras was used by drug trafficking organizations, and elements of the Contras themselves knowingly received financial and material assistance from drug traffickers. In 1996, Gary Webb wrote a series of articles published in the San Jose Mercury News, which investigated Nicaraguans linked to the CIA-backed Contras who had smuggled cocaine into the U.S., which was then distributed as crack cocaine into Los Angeles and funneled profits to the Contras. His articles asserted that the CIA was aware of the cocaine transactions and the large shipments of drugs into the U.S. by the Contra personnel, and directly aided drug dealers to raise money for the Contras. The Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post launched their own investigations and rejected Webb's allegations. In May 1997, the Mercury News executive editor Jerry Seppos, who had approved the series, published a column that acknowledged shortcomings in the series' reporting, editing, and production, while maintaining the story was correct on many important points. Webb later published a book based on the series, Dark Alliance, the CIA, the Contras, and the crack cocaine explosion. In October 2013, an American television network alleged that CIA operatives were involved in the kidnapping and murder of DEA covert agent Enrique Camarena because he was a threat to the agency's drug operations in Mexico in the 1980s. According to the network, this information was provided to them by multiple sources, specifically 2 former federal agents and an ex-CIA contractor. According to all 3 alleged sources, the CIA was collaborating with drug traffickers bringing cocaine and marijuana into the United States, and using its share of the profits to finance the Contra rebels attempting to overthrow Nicaragua's leftist Sandinista government. The CIA spokesman responding to the allegations called it ridiculous to suggest that the agency had anything to do with the murder of a U.S. federal agent or the escape of his alleged killer. The Honduran drug lord Juan Mata Ballesteros was the owner of Setco, an airline which the Nicaraguan Contras used to covertly transport military supplies and personnel in the early 1980s. Writers such as Peter Dale Scott and Jonathan Marshall have suggested that the U.S. government's desire to conceal or protect these clandestine shipments led it to close the DEA office in Honduras when an investigation began into Setco, allowing Mata Ballesteros to continue and expand his trafficking. In 1990, a failed CIA anti-drug operation in Venezuela resulted in at least a ton of cocaine being smuggled into the United States and sold on the streets. The incident, which was first made public in 1993, was part of a plan to assist an undercover agent to gain the confidence of a Colombian drug cartel. The plan involved the unsupervised shipment of hundreds of pounds of cocaine from Venezuela. The drug in the shipments was provided by the Venezuelan anti-drug unit, which was working with the CIA, using cocaine seized in Venezuela. The shipments took place despite the objections of the USDA. When the failed plan came to light, the CIA officer in charge of the operation resigned, and his supervisor was transferred. In addition, the former Venezuelan anti-narcotics chief General Ramon Guillen de Villa and his chief civilian aide were both indicted in connection with the shipments. Because Venezuela does not extradite its citizens, Guillen was not tried in the U.S., but his civilian aide was arrested while in the United States and sentenced to 20 years. Alfred McCoy has argued that the CIA had fostered heroin production in Afghanistan for decades to finance operations aimed at containing the spread of communism, and later to finance operations aimed at containing the spread of the Islamic State. McCoy alleges that the CIA protects local warlords and incentivizes them to become drug lords. In his book Politics of Heroin, McCoy alleges CIA complicity in the global drug trade in Afghanistan, Southeast Asia, Central America, and Colombia, arguing that the CIA follows a similar pattern in all their drug involvement. McCoy has also written that during the 1980s to fight the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the CIA, working through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, backed Afghan warlords who used the agency's arms, logistics, and protection to become major drug lords.